Okay, we're live. Thank you very much, Caitlin, Kristin, for joining myself and Rinki, who will also be joining us very shortly. Wherever everyone else is in the world, morning, afternoon, evening, thank you so much for joining us, and particularly for this session on breaking into health tech and new career paths for clinicians. I'm Azeem, and myself and hopefully Rinki as well will be your hosts for this session. And we're going to learn a huge amount from Caitlin and Kristin. I'm going to share a little bit, but I think those, you both will be the stars of the show for sure. So yeah, very, very grateful for your time again. For those of you who are joining on LinkedIn, we'll be keeping an eye on the comments within the event. So feel free to pop any comments in there. We'll try and respond to as many of those later on in the session as we go on. We suspect kind of the first half of the session will be predominantly going through our backgrounds, sharing a little bit about ourselves, our journeys, going through a few key and really high yield areas that we're commonly asked when it comes to being clinicians wanting to build careers in the health tech space. And then, as I said, please do pop your comments on the LinkedIn Live, and we will also try and get through those nearer the end and essentially do a Q&A. And we're also joined by Rinki as well. Thank you for joining us, Rinki. How are you?
Hi, everyone. I'm Rinki Varindani Desai. I'm sure Azeem has done a little bit of introduction, but I'm co-leading the 𝗙𝗏𝗏𝗏 USA Health Tech and Innovation Fellowship. We're launching in May, and we're really excited about that. But really, our whole goal is to get more clinicians interested in health tech and digital health, and even understand what this world is about, what kind of career opportunities are available to us, what kind of value we bring to the table, and why we have to demand a certain level of involvement and leadership and a seat at the table, because we have so much to offer in this world. So the topic today is really trying to figure out what career opportunities are available for clinicians in health tech. And it's open to clinicians from any kind of background who are just looking to see whether there are any roles that exist for them beyond the bedside and beyond the clinic, or people who are involved in clinical care and just want opportunities to still have impact at larger scale. We're joined by an incredible panel of clinicians representing radiology, mental health, occupational therapy, speech-language pathology, and all of us are involved in the industry in some way and in entrepreneurship. So we have lots to talk about. And I do want to thank all these wonderful clinicians for taking the time out to share their experiences and expertise with us. I'm going to go in alphabetical order. So we have Dr. Azeem Alam, NHS doctor, specialist registrar in clinical radiology, venture partner, board advisor in digital health, research fellow at Imperial College London. I don't know how he has the time to do all that he does, but most importantly, he's co-founder of 𝗙𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, and he started the 𝗙𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏's health tech program in the UK. And he's helped thousands of clinicians pivot and transition into health tech and innovation roles over the years. We have Dr. Kristin Nuckols, occupational therapist, co-founder and chief clinical officer, 𝗟𝗏𝗰𝗏𝗏𝗏, where she's leading the development of cutting-edge neuro rehab solutions and technology for stroke survivors. We have Dr. Caitlin Stamatis, clinical psychologist and chief clinical officer, Brune Health. She's a digital health advisor, product strategist, again, done lots of amazing things, known for designing evidence-based mental health solutions rooted in cognitive neuroscience. And I'm Rinki Varindani Desai. I'm a speech-language pathologist, founder of 𝗨𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, a digital health consulting firm, co-founder and CEO of an edtech company called 𝗨𝗏, and a clinical researcher at Mass General Hospital. As I said, I'll be co-leading the 𝗙𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏's Health Tech and Innovation Fellowship with Azeem, and we can talk more about that later. But before that, I'd just love for everyone to dive in and share their stories with us. What is it that you do now? What's your clinical background? And what prompted your shift from traditional clinical care into the world of health tech? Maybe we can start with Caitlin.
Yeah, happy to. And thank you so much, all of you, for having me here. I'm super excited for this panel, and just the fact that 𝗙𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 exists is such a testament to, the way that I think our field is evolving in such an awesome way. So let's see, my background, I'm a clinical psychologist by training. I started my career really in more traditional academic medical research. I was very focused on technology-enabled solutions, so doing a lot of work in digital phenotyping of depression and anxiety symptoms. feeling like, this is kind of the groundwork for being able to deliver these super personalized, adaptive, just-in-time interventions in mental health, right, when people need it the most. I think for me, it was, as a clinician, I was seeing at the time that a lot of this work felt really disconnected from what what clinicians could actually use in practice. I think more importantly, from what our healthcare system would actually pay for, what could be reimbursed or practically implemented. And so I had this moment of like, okay, I want to keep working on this, but to be able to build these tools in contexts where we could actually implement them at scale. So my transition to industry, I was fortunate to have an opportunity to build out a new program of research within Google. I was testing digital treatments for anxiety and PTSD. We did a lot of like rapid piloting, scaling the most effective solutions to, about 12,000 people. And so it was awesome from an impact perspective, but I really wanted to get back into healthcare. And so I transitioned to 𝗕𝗄𝗃, a digital therapeutics company where I was leading our clinical research and kind of medical affairs strategy. Super interesting time, a lot of, I think, excitement around digital therapeutics, but also seeing just how big of a problem reimbursement for digital therapeutics is in the United States. And made me want to help build something from the ground up, right? Where we're really attuned to some of these challenges of like, how does this fit into real world clinical workflows, meeting people where they are and meeting providers where they are in terms of actually delivering mental health treatment. So that's kind of what led me to Bruin Health. We have built a clinical decision support algorithm that helps primary care doctors just better manage, evaluate, treat mental health. Happy to share more about that work, but have been at a range of companies from big tech to small startup, and am happy to be here to be able to share a few things I've learned along the way. Obviously lots of bumps in the road, but I think it's a really exciting space to be working in as a clinical researcher.
That's amazing. We'll go to everyone, but a couple of things stood out in the journey that you shared. First of all, I'm amazed that your start was Google, like you went from clinical care to Google. So I want to know more about that. And I'm interested in knowing your perspective on, do you feel like there's one right way to start? So if someone wakes up and says, I want to start something in digital health, do you think the right step is trying to work for a bigger company, a startup, working for yourself as a consultant, quitting your job and going out full-time, trying to get a full-time product role or something in a company? I'm curious because I've been navigating that myself. So I'm curious about your perspective and also a little bit about how you ended up in big tech going from clinical care.
No, thanks for those questions. I mean, glossed over a lot of detail, but the short version is actually it was during my PhD. I think I knew like I loved research. I think I had this moment again around the scalability, impact, like implementation piece of maybe I don't need the content, like it doesn't have to be about the content, right? Maybe it's just the process of research that I like. And so I ended up applying to a bunch of PhD internships, actually, partway through my grad program. No, full transparency, no idea what I was doing at the time. I was throwing pasta at the wall, trying to see what would stick. And I, to this day, marvel at the fact that I got one interview out of like 15 to 20 things I threw out there. That interview happened to be with Google, right? Like cold application for people analytics summer PhD internship. And thankfully they took a chance on me. I had no industry experience at the time, was just a researcher hoping to learn things and work, learn what industry was like. And so that was, I think, a really valuable way for me, at least, to be able to do that mid-training. And kind of come out of that with the experience of like, oh, I actually really do like working in this setting. I think I also realized that the content was really important for me. So that particular internship was not mental health focused. It was working on more like organizational psychology topics. And I was like, I love the process, but I do want to be in health, right? In mental health. It's not just about the research. So that was a helpful realization, but yeah, and then it was thinking, so I went back, I did my clinical intern year after finishing my PhD, and was sort of like, oh, maybe I'll apply to postdocs or kind of see what's out there, look at digital health companies. And actually this role opened up. And since I'd had that connection at Google from the PhD internship, and it felt like more in the area, right, that fit with my expertise, that's how I landed back there. I don't think that there's one way to get into this field. I think for me personally, because I didn't have a ton of like experience outside of my PhD, with the exception of a little bit of consulting here and there, I think starting at a really big company and seeing what it's like to work in a very specialized function where there are processes and procedures and things are standardized, and you have data science experts to go to and engineers and product, and how all that cross-functional collaboration happens in an organization that's like humming along and doing it well already, like that was very valuable for me. And to be able to kind of take from that what I felt like worked well, and maybe leave behind the pieces that I felt frustrated with as I went to smaller and smaller organizations. But I think there's a case to be made for kind of throwing yourself into maybe an earlier stage startup to start too.
Yeah. Thank you. I've heard that from a lot of clinicians who feel both ways. Like sometimes it's better off if you start at a startup, because then you get to wear so many hats, and then you can kind of really get a feel for the things you're good at, what kind of skills you can transfer, what interests you, and then ideally grow with the company. But if not, maybe you'll realize the chaos of a startup is not for you at all, and you'll run the other way. So all of that is really good advice. I know a little bit about Kristin's background, but if you're willing to share kind of your research background as well, this amazing product that you've developed, what came out of it, how you founded Imago, and kind of what your journey into health tech has been.
Sure. I have a cold, sorry, so I'm not at my best, but I'm laughing at the chaos of a startup comment because I co-founded a startup, and so chaos is, something that I do deal with a lot. And I actually have that conversation with every person that I interview to join our team. I let them know, if you're someone who likes to know exactly what you're going to do and it's going to be boom, 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 and that's what you want, then you won't be happy at a startup.
Yeah.
So, but if you are okay with going with the flow and okay with building and okay with, what is the phrase, building the plane while you fly it, then you would like this, but there's really different types, and some people aren't comfortable with that chaos. And some people don't know because they've never been in a more chaotic environment. They've been in a hospital system where there were procedures and manuals and everything is predictable, as much as patient care is predictable.
Yeah.
Maybe for that reason, therapists, specifically healthcare workers, are maybe suited for a startup world, because there really isn't any exact way that a session is going to go. We're dealing with humans in all states of experience. And so we never know what's going to happen next in a therapy session. And so maybe that does lend us towards the chaos of a startup.
Yeah.
So I'll just kind of get into who I am and what I do and how I got here. So I've been an occupational therapist for the last 18 years. I'm a specialist in stroke rehabilitation, most types of neurologic rehabilitation. And I've always been a teacher and a trainer of technology and how we can use technology and how we should use technology. And that clinical translation part, that change management part, that helps us understand what do we think a technology is going to do. Just because a technology exists doesn't mean that you should use it with a certain patient, or that if you use it, you're going to get a miraculous result. So one of my early roles was in an inpatient rehab hospital, and I was asked to write a clinical practice guideline, understanding how should we use all of these technologies that we had in the rehab hospital, robotics and functional electrical stimulation and non-actuated devices, and just all these kind of tools that we had. How should we use them? So I read the literature on the devices, research papers on them, trying to understand, when you use this for a certain amount of time, what's the result, and how do we translate that to what we're doing? Yeah. And I didn't really know at the time how unusual that was, that I was being asked to do that. But that was a phenomenal training for me, to understand how do we use the literature to tell us what to do, and what are the barriers to that, and how far can we go with that before we have to decide our next move. So I've also spent time in just neurologic outpatient care, and really getting into kind of the nitty-gritty details of, what is the patient doing at home? What are they able to carry over out of a therapy session? Is this working for them? Are they getting better? Are they seeing results? Are they not seeing results? So just rather than just those first 2 weeks, so really seeing people for years, and how does their stroke or their brain injury or something evolve over time. And then I got an opportunity to work in a Harvard engineering lab on wearable soft robotics. And that's kind of where this next phase of my life came from. So I'm, on the patents for several upper limb robotic tools that are not on the market yet. And so, being able to lend my clinical voice to how and why certain technologies should be developed. How do we want them to operate? What do we want them to do for a patient? And so got to, put my clinical stamp on those things. And then also did my post-professional OTD at the time and wrote a thesis about how I thought I was going to solve the gap of upper limb, motor restoration. How are we going to improve what we do for people? And I decided to do that through a telehealth model. And then at the time, I wrote that it would be grant funded because there wasn't any coverage for telehealth. And then COVID started. And so then the billing codes became available. And so, we decided to start a startup. And you were speaking about timing, Rinki. And today is my third child's birthday, fourth birthday.
Yeah.
And it is the day before Imago Rehab, my startup, left Harvard. So I had twins that last go round, my 4-year-old, and I have this 4-year-old startup as well. And so I had to ask myself, is this the right time? Can I have a newborn, third child, and also, pull a startup off the ground?
And you've done it so successfully, so well. And you're such an inspiration.
Oh, thank you. I'm mostly tired and drink a lot of coffee, but I was actually talking about this during my clinical meeting that I had right before the webinar about this I'm trying to think of the word for this. Anyway, there's the analogy. There it is. Their analogy of the rubber balls and understanding that everyone is juggling balls and you have to know which ones are rubber, because you will drop them. You will drop balls. No one is doing it all. No one is succeeding in all parts of their life, right? So you just have to have the understanding of which ones are rubber and will bounce back after you drop them and which ones are glass. And so the glass ones, you don't want to, you can't drop those. You have to protect those. And those are things like your family, your mental health. And so there's other balls that can wait. So that's how you do it all.
Thank you for sharing that. So there's lots that stood out. Obviously, the last part about it, that speaks to me about prioritizing and thinking about when you say mental health. I think for a lot of clinicians, that's one of the big reasons they want to pivot. We know what happened to a lot of us during COVID. It's been crazy with the productivity-driven business-like environment that healthcare has become. In the US, payers' sources dictate a lot what we can do with patients. And I know that's a source of frustration for a lot of clinicians who want to pivot. On the other hand, I think a lot of clinicians I've personally spoken to feel a lot of shame, or they feel like their identities are tied to being a clinician. So they don't even want to tell someone they're doing anything else. And that's another thing that disturbs me, because I think we should proudly say that we're OTs, PTs, physicians, mental health professionals who are then, like Kristin said, taking our expertise and putting our clinical stamp on a product that probably would have never even gotten to market without us. And that's something even our national association should promote. I think we need more stories like that so that the clinicians who come after us don't feel that kind of shame or don't feel nervous asking questions about what else they can do beyond patient care. So the two things that stood out for me were, one, you said that you had all of these skills that you could then take to the engineering team, which was really interesting to me. So I'd love to open it up to the group and discuss what are the kinds of transferable skills that we can take from the clinic. We don't need certifications and all of these boot camps necessarily always. Like, I think there's a lot we have as clinicians that bring value to engineers and a lot of the tech teams. And then you said another thing about the startup world being chaotic. So another question that's come up to me from a lot of physicians and clinicians is they feel that healthcare is very structured, and are they going to be able to make it in tech? So I want to point that out because like Kristin said, no patient we see is ever the same. Like literally they could have the exact same diagnosis, age, all of the biological factors could be the same, but our session could look completely different. So we're used to pivoting, being flexible, being adaptable. Like we have those skills, just in a different kind of setting and different kind of place and role that we've played. So I don't think we should be nervous about working in any kind of startup to big tech environment, because I feel like as clinicians, we've been there, done that, and we can handle it. So what are the kinds of skills you guys think we bring to the table as clinicians that are of immense value and that are transferable in health tech?
Yeah, I'll mention something that I think I've told other people and they found it a little bit surprising. When I started working at Harvard in this, engineering lab and was with all these, either PhD candidates or postdoctoral fellows, and, there's a highly educated international, group. And I quickly realized that they didn't know upper limb anatomy. And I thought, boy, that might be useful. So really I didn't really ask for permission. I said, I'm going to start providing lunchtime presentations so that you guys can learn this stuff, because it will be helpful for all of us. It also established a language. And I think that's something that we bring from the therapy world, like I'm assuming they have it in other fields, but the occupational therapy, OTPF, which is our framework. So it defines all these different phrases and this language for us. And so because we have this framework, we can go back to that and draw and say, this is the thing I'm working on. It's this part of the framework. And so I provided that to these engineers and said, let me explain to you how the shoulder works and the planes of motion, which way is the patient facing? How are they? Just these different things that come naturally to the clinician. And if you don't know them, then you won't be able to help a shoulder move better if you don't know how the shoulder should move to begin with. That is basically evidence-based practice. That's something we bring as healthcare providers. We want to know the evidence. We want to share the facts. And then also just this comfort with either asking questions or supplying information. And I think that is, I didn't wait till someone asked me how a shoulder works. I just recognized the need and said, hey, I'm going to present this to you in a way that is approachable and doesn't make anybody feel stupid. And then I'm going to ask you about things that you're talking about, like Raspberry Pi, which is one of my favorite examples, because I would be like, why are we talking about Raspberry Pi? And it's a controller, type. And I don't want to go too deep on that because I'll get it wrong. But, whenever they would say something that didn't make sense, I would Google it, or I would jump in and say, what is that? Because I wasn't worried about looking stupid. If I wanted to be helpful, I had to understand the language.
So what I got from that is we're educators, we're flexible, adaptable, we're not afraid to ask questions, and we're lifelong learners. And I think that's true for clinicians from any background. Maybe we can go with Caitlin next, if you have any skills that you think are transferable for you, and then we'll jump to Azeem.
I think it's such a great question. And Kristin, I love the frame that you put all of that in. I think there are two things that jump out to me. So one is being able to translate really complex science into actionable insights, right? And so when I think about that, whether you're a clinician or a clinical researcher, like your job is effectively digesting a ton of data, doing something with it that's really complicated, and then having to translate that, whether it's a publication, whether it's into a protocol, whether it's to a patient or a family member, right? Explaining that in a way that's understandable, that's going to motivate behavior change. And I realized that, like, when someone is applying to a role, I'm thinking about at Google, when we would review people's applications coming from PhD programs, it's like, we know that you can do research, or we know that you have this clinical experience or expertise. But the question is, can you translate that for an executive audience who maybe is going to give you 5 minutes of time and be listening for the first 20 seconds, right? So it's taking something super complicated, distilling that down, figuring out what's most important, and how do I convey that in a way that's going to garner trust and motivate change? And I think that clinicians are trained to do that. So it's just figuring out how to translate that to the business context. I think the other piece, the sort of strength that we bring is, and you said this, Rinki, like, we're used to working as part of a multidisciplinary team. There's no clinician who's operating in isolation, or really, I think, shouldn't be, right? And so many of us have been in contexts where we're having to navigate different clinical stakeholders who are all working on the same shared problem, which is how do I help this patient get better, but maybe have very different incentives, kind of beliefs about best approaches, goals, challenges, and it's the same thing in a business context, right? You are going to be working with people who are coming from very different experiences, expertises, who have different maybe motivations, different target metrics they're trying to achieve, and you have to figure out, okay, how do I align my incentives with their priorities in order to drive this forward? And so it's a skill that we already have, and we've had to do, I would argue, in one of like the most kind of high risk environments to be doing that in, right? Where what's at stake is patient livelihood, translating that to a context where there's arguably a little bit more room for error, right? In a business context.
Thank you. Before we jump to Azeem, another one that stood out to me a lot was, maybe more so as a speech pathologist, is we're working with patients all day, and we've chosen these careers literally to help people. Most of us don't even get nearly paid as much as I think we should, or as much as physicians make. So really, we're in this business to help people and serve people. And I think the skill that we develop over the years is empathy, where a business owner who hasn't been in a setting like that is probably always thinking about the business needs. But I think as clinicians, we just naturally put patients first. Even if it's not a patient-focused product, I think we put the end user first. And I found that probably it's a skill I took for granted, but working in teams, having empathy, trying to always put the patient first, I think are skills that make or break a product. So I feel like that's another thing we really can leverage and really add value to whatever it is that we're building. Azeem, I know we've been talking a lot, but I'd love for you to introduce yourself. I know you're doing all of these wonderful things, so maybe introduce us to your world of digital health in the UK. And if you could also talk about what your motivation was to start this company called 𝗵𝗿 and 𝗵𝗿 Labs, and why you saw the need for a fellowship like this, would be really helpful for those watching.
Yeah, sure. And yeah, thank you to all three of you once again. Like, I've been listening and digesting in the background. There's so much for me to learn, so really grateful. Yes, a little bit about myself. So I'm a doctor by background. I'm a radiologist. I live in London, did all my training in London, medical school, foundation years, etc. I then took some time out from medicine, did some odd bits and pieces working in the music industry, came back, and then decided to start a company. The 𝗵𝗿 Labs, as Rinki mentioned, is part of a larger organization broadly within the EdTech and HealthTech space. And 𝗵𝗿 Labs was started after I pivoted my career into digital health. I started working at a domiciliary tech company called 𝗟𝗏, which is now, I believe, the largest digital health company in Europe. It's raised over 500 million in venture funding. And my role there was within data analytics and basically, as a clinical subject matter expert. And a lot of what I was doing in kind of on the day-to-day was translating a lot of what we've described here already, is taking quite complex problems, being able to break them down, and seeing and discussing with others who weren't clinical about whether they were actually clinically viable solutions. And I think a lot of clinicians often come to me and say, you can't develop a career in the digital health space because I'm not a coder, or I'm not technical, or I have no specific skill set, like I'm not UI, I'm not UX, I'm not a designer, whatever it may be. And I think I realized in this journey, going from starting the business, then moving into tech, I realized actually a lot of these other skills we've described, these kind of softer skills of being able to take really complex things and break them down into their constituents and then explaining the actionable steps, is really, really helpful. So I'll give you an example. We were developing a device to try and monitor things like oxygen saturations, blood pressure, etc. in the community, elderly people being looked after at home by their carers. And the company wanted to develop some kind of AI approach to monitoring all of these essentially digital biomarkers to be able to predict hospitalization risk over a 7-day period. And what had been designed was oxygen saturations of 60% being the lower cutoff for flagging up on the system. And anyone who is clinical, listening to this will know that oxygen saturation of that level is just simply not compatible with life. So it's really little things like that from the clinical side of things, but then also being able to understand that you don't need to be a developer to understand how to develop a digital health product and what does the pipeline look like, and bring skill sets that are more broad and creative, and just being comfortable with uncertainty, and that there is no guideline on what is the oxygen saturation level for an at-home domiciliary tech device, but you're going to have to build a workflow that works and be comfortable with that uncertainty. But anyway, to answer the final bit of the question of why Byte Labs was built, was because there are countless clinicians who I'd encountered in my clinical practice who wanted to develop digital health products, and whether that was working for a Google Health or a AWS Life Sciences or a company like Sarah, or if it was building their own digital health products and building a startup, they just didn't know what to do or where to start. And similarly, big tech companies wanting to hire clinical talent didn't know where to find those individuals. So we acted as essentially the middleman in that process, saying we can upskill over a set period, get taught by the best people in the industry, give the people real world products to build and to work on, to help them get placed at those big digital health companies or even smaller ones. And similarly, if they wanted to build their own digital health products, they now have a framework and a foundation and some experience and a network to do so. So we've done this in the UK, we've trained thousands of clinicians, and we're just super excited to see what we can do in the US as well. But that's my monologue over, Rinki, and hopefully answers your question somewhat.
No, you're always so humble, Azeem. Like, I feel like there's such a need for this. I am a speech pathologist. I've been in clinical care for 15 years, and I didn't even realize that a lot of the side projects I was doing or the side gigs I was involved in were digital health or health tech. Like, I didn't know what those words meant because I thought I would be treating literally till the day my body allows. And then COVID happened, which led to a lot of burnout. My husband's a physician as well. We wanted to have a baby. I got pregnant and I was like, there's no way I can continue working in the American healthcare system that expects me to be back at work in 3 months and have a baby and still have a family and still try to do it all, which made me start thinking about what else I can do. And over the years, I look back and I'm like, what have I done that's not clinical care? And I've been involved in projects like developing a mobile app for patients with dysphagia, launching my own startup with a researcher that we basically provide clinical training to speech pathologists involved in managing swallowing disorders. I've run online communities, again, been part of lots of projects that involved some kind of product development, business development, trying to form communities that got people together. So strategic partnerships who are involved in the tech side of things in our field. But I always thought of those as either hobbies or side gigs because there wasn't a word for it. And nobody at work ever encouraged anything we did outside of clinical care that didn't bring the hospital money. And that's when I explored digital health. I launched my own digital health consulting firm called 𝗨𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 year where I'm completing my clinical doctorate. So we are developing a digital health tool for patients with ALS. But I was like, I still feel like such an imposter. Like here I am consulting all of these startups and companies, and who am I to be saying something? So let me talk to some clinicians and see how they pivoted. And Kristin was one of those clinicians I spoke with. So those informational interviews helped a lot. And I knew I didn't want like a full-time role in product or in user experience. I didn't want those kinds of certifications or boot camps. And one thing led to another that led me to 𝗫𝗏𝗏𝗏. And I knew this program was in the UK, and I set up a call that connected me with Azeem. And I just said, hey, are you guys coming to the US? Like, there's such a need for this. It's 8 weeks. It's hybrid and remote, so it can accommodate busy clinicians and just get us to learn a little bit more about digital health. And one thing led to another, and we're working together now, which has been such an amazing experience. But I think there's a need for courses like 𝗫𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏. But I also think, like I said, there's lots of other things that we can be doing that involve some kind of process improvement or some kind of product development, working in interdisciplinary teams, which can all be then taken to an interview that's non-clinical, that can still make you a really good candidate. So I guess my question for everyone is, if there's a clinician watching who has this kind of hesitancy to take the next step and doesn't know where to begin, what would be one suggestion you give them, or a couple? Like, do you feel like they need to take a course? they need to sign up for a fellowship like 𝗫𝗫𝗄𝗃? Is there something they can be doing inside of the systems they work in? Should they consider some kind of side gig, starting their own company? Like, what would your suggestion be for someone to start small if they were wanting to do something today?
Yeah, I get this question a lot, and I think, you know, it's funny, as you were speaking, Azeem, the point you made about, like, I think as clinicians or scientists, it's often, I think we think like, okay, I need to, if I want to work in tech, then, well, I don't know Python. Like, someone this morning was like, should I learn Python? And I'm like, I don't, maybe if you want to, but I don't think you need to. Like, that sounds hard, right? And I think it's not necessarily going deeper on the technical stuff. It's, yeah, to your all of your points, like figuring out what are the, first of all, give yourself credit for the things you are already doing, figure out what that is and how you just spin that, translate it to like the business world. But then I think also, you know, some first steps I usually suggest to people, like really learn the landscape, right? Follow people in health tech on LinkedIn, engage in conversations, just set up coffee chats with people. You know, if you're like, I don't, what is clinical product, right? Find someone who does that, who you have a mutual connection with, get an intro. And people are, I think, more than willing, especially folks who come from backgrounds like ours, right, to have these conversations, because at least for me, like, I love talking to people who are exploring making this transition, because I didn't feel like there was a playbook for me, or there wasn't a program like 𝗫𝗫𝗄𝗃 around, right? Like, that would have given me that infrastructure to make this transition a little bit more smoothly. I think absolutely doing a career accelerator, a program like 𝗫𝗫𝗄𝗃 is an amazing step people can take. I think also trying to, like, joining some of the, you know, there are some communities in digital health out there, like Slack communities, where people will post about consulting gigs or opportunities, right, to just get your hands dirty a little bit in this space, and to kind of show potential future employers that you're able to translate your research or clinical expertise into product development. I think getting a little bit of that consulting work is valuable, and also just like being open, right, to different opportunities, because, you know, never did I, when I started my PhD in clinical psych, like, never did I think that the end result would be taking like an analytics role within Google, right? But I've learned so much, and it set me up for where I am now. So yeah, being open and just building that network to figure out what exactly it is that you want to do.
Kristin?
Yeah, those are useful. Yeah, I think, you know, there's a lot of communities, like you mentioned, Caitlin. There's communities on the therapy side as well. Things like the non-clinical PT, or there's some coaching organizations like Collective Coaching. So you can be on LinkedIn or subscribe to their email updates and just get so much information. The non-clinical PT, for example, they send out, I think it's on Sunday nights, they send out a blast with a list of non-clinical positions. And I am not looking for a new job, because I love my job and I helped start this company. So I'm not leaving. But I look through them because they're fascinating. Wow, how interesting. Oh, it's, you know, sometimes it's medical sales, or sometimes it is, you know, clinic liaisons. They're all over the place. And that's the fun part, is that, you know, you're right, Rinki. You said it a little bit ago that you thought you would just treat patients until you died, right? Yeah, I think that's what I went into this field for too. And so this is not what I planned on, but I'm really glad that I'm doing it. So being part of these different networking groups. Another one for me is American Congress of Rehab Medicine Technology Networking Group. Yeah. Because these are folks who care about using technology, and some of us are clinicians, some of us are researchers, some of us are from industry, or a range, you know, tick all of those boxes. And so that's a really great place too, where there are recurrent meetings. We get together at the yearly conference. We present together. We talk about evidence. So that's another great group too.
I'll jump in with 2 points, Azeem, and then I'll kind of hand it over to you if that's okay. Because just speaking about the US landscape, this is something I found useful. When I started interviewing, because I thought, well, obviously I've been working full-time and I'll just find another full-time remote gig. I wasn't even considering the fact that I'd run a startup for 7 years as anything that was valuable, because in my head, it felt like a side gig. And so I didn't lead with that. I led with the fact that I'm a clinician. I talked about stuff I did clinically. I talked about leadership stuff that probably those startups cared nothing about, because they just don't value those kinds of skills. And then I started seeking out like mentorship networks, like you said, coffee chats on LinkedIn, informational interviews. I do also want to mention 𝗕𝗁𝗏𝗏. It's like a free mentorship group for women in health tech and in C-suite positions. And you can set up like free mentorship calls with people once a month and chat with people who've kind of been there, done that. I found that extremely helpful. And one of the mentors I spoke with, she's like, wait, let me get this right. You've been running a startup for 7 years. It's successful. It's $1 million business. Like, why are you not leading with that? That is what you sell. That's why people will hire you. And it completely shifted my mindset. Because again, I think as clinicians, we don't know how to even showcase those transferable skills, because we don't even know that anything we do beyond clinical care has value. So I think just think back to the projects and different kinds of things you've worked on that weren't direct clinical care, and then maybe talk to people who've done this before you to see how you can now speak that same thing in a language that would make sense to a business, use objective data like we do with our patients, and put that into meaningful, transferable skills and numbers that would make someone want to work with you. The other thing Kristin mentioned also is, like you said, there's communities like the non-clinical PT. So again, there's lots of communities, Byte Labs being one of them, that people don't hesitate to help. But I think as clinicians, we're so used to our undergrad, grad, doctorate, if we do it, we're so used to everything being so predictable and linear that we're too afraid to even ask how to step out of those boxes. And we feel like there has to be a very specific ask and very specific next step. And I think it was hard for me to be okay with not knowing where any conversation will lead and not knowing what I'm going to be doing for the next 6 months. And then coming back to the conclusion that for me, that was working for myself in entrepreneurship. So like Caitlin said, be open to being open. Just kind of see what's out there, see what you learn through these conversations, and be humble enough to know that we don't know it all. We haven't done this before, and we just have to kind of soak in and assimilate all the information we can get, and then try to make decisions about the next step. Somebody asked what the platform name for the C-suite mentoring is. It's 𝗕𝗁𝗏𝗏𝗏, SWEETNER. So you can look that up. And I think it would be helpful to a lot of people. Azeem, do you think it's different on the other side of the pond? Like, have you had any different experiences as a physician, maybe? Anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, what you described there is funny, Rinki, because that was one of the first things I was going to say. And I thought that was a British problem, which is like partly we're really bad at selling ourselves or even just talking about ourselves. Mm-hmm. And to then, you inherently, if you're trying to build a career outside of your clinical work, there's already a degree of imposter. Britishness, chuck on some imposter syndrome. You really have nothing to talk about, because and that's just in the UK. I think, as Rinki perfectly described there, this is ubiquitous, I think, across clinicians. It's difficult to really see the tangible value that you can provide outside of your work unless you know what people are looking for. So I think it's becoming comfortable with talking about yourself and actually being proud of what you do. I mean, what's in the UK is we have to do quality improvement projects within our clinical workplace every single year. Like once a year, you have to do some element of quality improvement. Yeah. And clinicians don't really see that as work, in inverted commas. It's seen as a hoop jumping exercise. But if you step back and say, oh, actually, I implemented some kind of workflow in my improved efficiency by 10%, that's impressive. It may be a hoop you have to jump through to get. Actually, that is something of value, and that's just one example. So that's one thing. And the other thing is we're very bad at is cold outreach. And I've seen countless people, and by the way, every single trap we've described is a lot of my journey. If people are either really bad at just reaching out to people and wanting to build those relationships, because most British people aren't particularly extroverted, myself included, and people go to a lot of conferences but are really good at standing on the sidelines and just watching things unfold, myself included. And it is not about how many people know, about developing deep friendships with a small handful of people that you can actually learn from. Much better to have 3 mentors that you're learning from who have done a journey that you aspire to be, rather than 30 people that you've met at a conference that you're never going to speak to again. That's kind of generally my experience anyway. So those are a few bits and pieces that I've seen in this, so the case across the pond as well.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah.
Something that stuck out to me a little bit was just the getting used to talking about yourself, or getting used to sharing these complicated concepts we're talking about, and we've got to learn to drill down. And so that's something that I have done a fair amount of. And this is the painful way that I've done it. You record yourself talking and then you watch it. And I plan to watch this later. You're going to post this on LinkedIn Live, or it's on LinkedIn Live now, but you're going to post it as a recording, and we can watch ourselves and we can learn about things that went well and things that didn't go well. In the very beginning, I couldn't find the word analogy in my head, and that's bothering me because I stumbled around looking for it. But things like that, when you watch yourself, how you present, you learn your mannerisms, you learn your phrases that work for you. You learn maybe an example you love to give, but you don't tell it well. You learn to fix those things, so that when you're giving a presentation, you know how you're going to sound, you know how you're going to carry your body, you know the stories you're going to tell that are going to illustrate your points well. So it's painful sometimes to watch yourself on video, but it's one of the best ways. Even if you're at your house, I'll just open up a Zoom call and I'll click record and I'll talk about something, and then I'll listen to it and just sort of learn, how do I want to say that differently? How does that story work for me? Does that example work? How can I, what part of this presentation did I stumble over? That's the part that needs to be changed. So that's a really great, but painful learning experience that people can take for themselves.
Thank you. I also added some of the resources we talked about in the chat. So another thing I want to quickly touch upon, because we don't have a lot of live questions yet, just lots of great comments, by the way, and everybody has fans in the audience. So I want to talk about what roles are available for clinicians in health tech, because again, that was confusing to me. I think where I started was even thinking about what else is even possible, and then trying to figure out people who do that, and then trying to have the coffee chats and learning more about those careers. Some of the common ones I think we touched upon are clinical product, data analytics, obviously being a clinical advisor of some kind to companies, launching your own thing, so being an entrepreneur, being a researcher. Can you all talk about some roles that may not be as well known, but that exist for clinicians in the health tech world?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, coming from a clinical psychology background, it was interesting. A lot of people I'd seen who were psychologists make the industry or health tech transition into health tech came from more of like a cognitive neuroscience background. We're not clinicians, and maybe went into like UX research roles or data science roles. And that was sort of what I had in mind as like what you can do in industry. And I think it took time for me to realize there's actually so much out there. And it's a common challenge of like, I don't know what I don't know. I don't know what to look for. So I think like, yes, absolutely. Clinical research and product roles are out there at different types of companies. I think it's also worth pointing out that all of those types of roles can look vastly different at different companies, right? Like a user researcher, even within Google, 2 UX researchers can have completely different jobs and working on completely different products. One might be even totally internally focused, right? I think outside of that too, like medical affairs is a whole other field that, especially in like clinical psychology, even though we have a lot of, especially with companies building out more and more their digital therapeutics pipelines within pharmaceutical companies, like a lot of relevant knowledge there, and understanding, how you might make that transition is a whole other, I think, thing that we could talk about, but that's another field that I think is important to look at. Also like clinical operations and care delivery. So a lot of digital health companies need people to help like get virtual care models up and running, to design interventions and kind of build them out, figure out how and when to scale them. Obviously we talked about product and UX, and then also like roles in the regulatory and compliance space, right? So being the clinical expert who can weigh in on some of those really important matters.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Some of the other ones that I see are things like client success. So onboarding customers to a platform. Again, we've talked about clinicians being educators, and this is something we're really good at, is just really laying out information for people, checking to see if they learned it before we add more. So those client success managers, or sometimes a customer success, where they're managing relationships between, say, an outside vendor and the company that you're working for. Again, that's what we do. We manage the customer, we manage the client. So those are roles that I think clinicians fit well into.
Yeah, those are the ones I came across as well. And even learning the lingo, right? Like, what's an MVP? What's a KPI? What's an OKR? Like, again, that could be a whole webinar in itself. But if those are business terms, if you haven't been exposed to a business before, you don't speak the startup lingo, just like we all have our crazy medical lingo that nobody would know anything about when each of us chat with each other, I think that's something you have to be willing to just be okay with not knowing, but try to soak up as much as you can when you start out at one of these roles. Watch webinars. I think there's a lot of great conversations happening in Slack communities. I think that helped me pick up a lot as well. And then Azeem, I'm curious, you're in the venture world, which I don't think any of us are, unless I'm mistaken. So I want to know more about that and kind of what role clinicians play in that, because I feel like we touched upon a bunch of other things we can be doing.
Yeah, I mean, venture is an interesting one for clinicians. I haven't seen many clinicians dive directly from clinical work into venture. There's usually some kind of pathway that they've taken, usually got down the consulting route and then ending up in venture seems to be the most common. Some have gone into pharma and then ended up in venture. I mean, my experience, I mean, I'm essentially like a venture partner or venture scout, kind of comes under the same umbrella. It's about having a keen eye for knowing which companies are investable. Like that's essentially the role that most clinicians take in venture companies in a nutshell. The issue is that if you don't have some element of a finance or consulting-ish type background, or at least run your own company for a little while, it can be difficult to know what to look for in those companies that are investable. Even from a non-financial perspective, like, you know, you should be able to read a P&L, but like you don't need to be able to dive deep into every company's financial metrics to determine which companies to invest in. But you need to know and be able to do pretty good due diligence, even from a non-financial perspective. And clinicians are very intelligent, educated people that already to break down really complex ideas into their constituents. And they're also able to kind of, once again, I don't really know, I've forgotten the phrase, but see the wood from the trees or something along those lines, and all the murky water and figure out actually what are the salient bits here in terms of what a company is proposing that they can do versus what can they actually do. But as I said, I think it's more unusual for clinicians to go directly from the wards into a venture space. Usually they take some other type of route. I guess from a clinical perspective, most of the clinicians I've worked with have gone into product-ish type roles, or at least within the department of product type roles. Or service delivery is one that I don't think we've touched on, which is, you know, putting together really robust programs and plans for how is a product going to be delivered and then actually shipped to the customer. And once again, clinicians are generally very organized people. They manage their time well, and if you're on a ward round and you have 50 patients that you need to round on, plus 50 additional tasks per patient, you know, that is a transferable skill to being a service manager or service delivery manager and product manager, in that you have to be able to prioritize tasks really well. And then you can figure out as you go along, you can learn what Kanban is, you can learn what a Gantt chart is. Like, these things aren't massively complicated. There are thousands of free resources online that you can learn those from. You can do a course like BioLabs. It doesn't really matter as long as the base competency is there, which inevitably it will be, because you are a clinician.
I tell people, if you've studied the human anatomy and physiology, like we've done way more studying than most people have. So I think we're going to be fine. So I want to add something that helped me before we wrap up, when you mentioned the evaluating startups. So obviously I had a business background with running my own startup, but I signed up to be a judge at 2 events. One of them is called Mass Challenge, which is Boston based, where Kristin is from. And the other is the Health Foundation, HealthTech, and they have a conference every year. And they have something called the Digital Health Awards I guess it's like part of the conference, but they have a hub where a lot of companies like send their pitches and they get selected to be candidates for awards in different categories in digital health. And I didn't get accepted for the Mass Challenge one, but I got accepted for the Health Foundation one. And that was really interesting because just if any of you have been a journal reviewer, article reviewer for the first time, there's all of these like criteria that allow us to judge if it's good evidence or a good article or not. Similarly, there were very specific criteria that gave us the opportunity as judges to evaluate startups. It was really structured and not something I had done before. So it was like a nice free way to get into that world and kind of see what pitching looks like. I know Kristin's done a lot of that. What you're looking for when you're evaluating whether a product is a good one or not, whether a startup deserves a certain kind of funding or not. So I found that really helpful. Before we kind of wrap up, and I'm sure we'll get lots of questions after this, I want to thank Kristin and Caitlin for being willing to be workshop leads and advisors in our inaugural 𝗫𝗫𝗄𝗏 Fellowship. I think that's going to be so valuable to so many clinicians. We've been really intentional about trying to get clinicians across different diverse perspectives and settings and backgrounds, because we feel like we're all in this together in healthcare. And I think I'm personally tired of everyone being seen in terms of their different degrees and disciplines. We're all here trying to make a difference. If there was one thing you could go back to your younger self, or the first time you were thinking about making a transition to health tech, what would you tell yourself back then that you've learned now through your journey? Could we start with Azeem first, because he founded 𝗫𝗫𝗄𝗏 and is the reason we're here today, and then we can go to Caitlin and Kristin.
I think in the interest of time, I'll try and keep mine very brief. I think the main thing for me is like you don't need to ask for permission to do things. I think you just need to do them. Now, whether that is reaching out to the CEO of a huge, a Google Health, for example, like the chief medical officer, and trying to arrange a coffee with them, like that, you don't need permission to do that. Just do it. Like you need to, if you want to start a company, you can register a company on Companies House in the UK, and you just get on with it. I think the whole point and the whole reason I say that is as a big learning point that has taken me a long time to learn is that nothing can teach you what you need to know when it comes to building a digital health company or building any type of product. Nothing is better than experience. You can read as many books as you want, you can watch as many videos and go on as many courses as you want, but you actually need to go and get your hands dirty. That's my experience anyway. And I wish I'd done that slightly earlier on. I think fear is a big component of that. Imposter syndrome is a big component of that. But yeah, that's just one thing off the top of my head in the 5 seconds I had to prepare that.
Thank you. Caitlin, what about you?
Yeah, I think for me it would be like you learn the most from failures, right? And I think especially being, when you're oftentimes on a track like this, you're used to knowing, and you said this earlier, used to knowing what the next thing is, or feeling like the next milestone is clear, or seeing people you admire and a career path that looks really linear. And like probably mine looks really linear to some people out there, but the way I experience it, it's anything but, right? Like lots of ups and downs, lots of times where I've questioned my own decisions and feel like I didn't accomplish what I set out to. And so remembering that everyone feels that way, and that even if something like the biggest learnings I think that I've had from different work experiences I've had were not the like glowing successes, they were the ones that were most challenging.
Yeah, that's really well put. Kristin?
I think I would say to just, throw your hat in the ring, because there's some other opportunities I sort of turned down thinking like, oh, I don't know how to do that, or that's not I won't have anything to offer there. But I probably would have. And I didn't know what I had to offer. And so, these days I understand more of my value and my worth as a business person. And that is not something I would have said, 5 years ago. So just being willing to throw your hat in the ring and try something out. Just because you take a role doesn't mean you have to take it forever. You're not going to take it forever. That's not really how things work these days. So just trying something out and being willing to learn something new and to experience it is just going to be so valuable.
Yeah. So for me, it was all of these things, but I think I'm really passionate about helping other clinicians now seek out non-clinical or non-traditional career opportunities. And I want to try to empower as many people as I can through everything that I do, including Byte Labs, to just know that I think we need to be proud of our clinical background, but need to also be okay with having conversations that result in maximizing that impact in different ways. And I hope this is something they start teaching us in undergrad and grad school, and having those conversations, and not 10 years later when we're burnt out trying to figure out what to do. So really, thank you all. Thank you so much for being here today. I think this is going to be so informative. We have some very positive comments, but I know this is going to be recorded and stay on the Byte Labs LinkedIn page. So please share it with others. I think this is just the start of many helpful conversations. If what any of you heard today resulted in any kind of curiosity, motivation, passion, you can follow any of us. You can reach out if you have questions. I want to reiterate that the world of health tech needs us as clinicians. We've outlined so many roles that we can apply to, so many things we can be doing, and so many skills we can take from the clinical world into these non-clinical opportunities. If any of you want to take the first step and use Byte Labs as that next step in your journey, you can check out the upcoming Byte Labs USA HealthTech and Innovation Fellowship. We're kicking off in May in Boston. It's open to clinicians from any background at any stage in your careers. We have advisors like Caitlin and Kristin who will be workshop leads. It's hybrid and also remote, so you can do it from home, and it's an 8-week fellowship. We're really curious to see what clinicians get out of this, and hopefully, like all the things we talked about, we're open to learning from each experience and continuing to grow not just the program, but the community of clinicians in health tech, because I feel like that's really missing, not just in the US, but globally. So you can check out bytelabs.io for that. And thank you again for joining us, and hoping to see many of you next time.